Díomh agus fáilte ais go dtí Irish language teacher is Misha Breach. Now today we're discussing the abature, the alphabet in Irish, and we have gone through in the previous lessons, we've just gone through the letters that are in the alphabet, the letters that are in the English alphabet but are not in the Irish alphabet, and also we have looked at how some consonants change their sound depending on which vowel comes after them. So this is just to help you get used to maybe reading Irish and helping you with your pronunciations. So I want to do a little review of what we call the Uru. Now the Uru is when another letter goes in front of a consonant. Okay, so I tend to think of it as being a little bit like when the sun eclipses the moon or the moon eclipses the sun and something gets covered up. Now the good thing about Irish is that you can see the letter that is being preceded. Okay, so the best thing to do is just give you examples. So what I've done is I've put together our examples. Now, B is our consonant and the Uru for B is M. So you're going to see words in Irish that are going to have an M in front of the B. Now, the actual word is always going to begin with B. Depending on what's happening in the sentence, you might see that with an M in front of it. Okay, and that is the Uru for B. Okay, B is not the Uru, M is the Uru. So M is the Uru for B. Now, the pronunciation of the word, let's just take the word for example, bod for boat. If you see the word boat with M in front of it, the sound of the B is going to disappear. So it will be pronounced maud. The B sound will disappear. Now, you'll still see it written there. It'll be obvious, but you don't pronounce it. So it eclipses the sound. So that's why I like to think of it as the eclipses. So when the official name for it is actually Uru or ellipsis. Okay, I think. Okay, anyway, I hope you get my drift. So the next letter in the alphabet that has an Uru is C. And again, if we have a look at it, C, the word for cat is cat in Irish. And sometimes you might see a word beginning with C with the letter G in front of it. G is the Uru for C. So for example, if something in the sentence meant that the word cat was getting G in front of it, you would be pronouncing it gat. The sound of the C will disappear, the G will take over. So the sound of the Uru will take over how you pronounce the word. Okay, the sound of the word. So G is the Uru for C. Okay. The next one, D. N is the Uru for D. So let's take a word in Irish, for example, door, which is Urus. Sometimes you might see, again, depending on what is happening in the sentence, you might see N in front of D. If it was in front of the word for door, it would be Urus, Urus. Okay, so again, the sound of the D is going to disappear and the sound of the N will dominate. So the sound of the Uru letter will always dominate when you speak it. Now, if you're reading it, if you're looking at it and you're not speaking at it and you're just reading it into yourself, you can clearly see what the word is. It's going to begin with a D and the D is still going to be written down. But when you pronounce it, you're not going to hear that D at all. Okay, so you always dominate the sound of the word when the Uru is there. You pronounce the Uru and not the first letter of the word. Okay. Now, the next one is a great one. The next one is F. So F is the consonant and BH is the Uru. This is the only letter, the only consonant that has two letters to make up the Uru. So the good news is that when you see BH in front of F, it disappears the sound of the F, but also the BH will be pronounced as a W sound or a V sound. Okay, so BH in front of F will be a V sound or a W sound. Now, so F for fhuinneog, which is window, fhuinneog. If there was a BH in front of fhuinneog, it would be bhuinneog or winneog. Again, you're going to hear the sound of the BH, the Uru, and the F sound will disappear. Okay, so the next one is G. G. And G, the Uru for G is N. It's another N. So again, if you have a word beginning with a G, it's the N sound that will dominate when you speak it. If you see the Uru in front of the G, you will pronounce it with the N, and the sound of the G will disappear. Okay, so for example, you will hear people talk about Galway, and they will say in Galway, I naliv. And it's the N sound, even though Galway begins with a G. Okay, now the next one is P, and the Uru for P is B. Okay, so B goes in front of a P. So again, you will hear B pronunciation instead of P. So if the Uru for P is B, let's take an example of Port Lariga for Waterford, Port Lariga. In Port Lariga would be Bort Lariga. So the B sound will dominate. The sound of the Uru will always dominate when it's there. When you can see it, if you're reading it, that's the sound that will dominate. And the final Uru is the Uru for T. And the Uru for T is D. So again, we will, if we're speaking it, we will say D in front of T. The D sound will dominate and the T sound will disappear. Okay, so let's have another example. For the word for house is chalk, begins with T. And if we were saying in a house, we would say I jock. It's a D sound, I jock. The T sound disappears and the D sound will dominate. So when you say the Uru in front of a word, you know that that is a sound that you have to give precedence to. You have to pronounce that sound first. The next letter will disappear. Okay, you'll still see it there. You'll still see it always written down. You'll notice it in our place names a lot in Ireland. And it's actually really interesting to just start looking at the place names now and spotting the Urus. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the vowels, because for vowels, the Uru for vowels is always N. So very quickly, you're going to see N in front of an A, or an A fada. You're going to see an N in front of an E, or an E fada. You're going to see it in front of an I, or an I fada. And you're going to see it in front of an O, or an O fada. And finally, you'll see it in front of a U, or a U fada. Now, again, when you see the N in front of a vowel, it's going to dominate the sound. Okay? It's going to take over the sound, so it'll be N in front of the sound. So that is the Uru for any vowel. Now, sometimes you'll see it with a little hyphen between the N and the vowel, and that's perfectly normal. So the clue for that is it's still the Uru. You're still going to see it, but if the letter is a capital letter, there's no hyphen. If it's a small letter, there is a hyphen. So that's why there's a difference in terms of how you might see it written down. There is no difference in terms of pronouncing it. The N will dominate the sound of the vowel. So for example, if we say in Ireland, we would say I for in, Nieran, and it's going to become Nieran. So again, the N will dominate. Now it's easier to see that for the vowels, because the N, it naturally will take over the sound of the vowel anyway. But it's just that you're aware that that is the Uru for vowels. Okay, so I hope that sort of helps with the pronunciation of maybe helping you with place names and making you aware of the Urus for those 7 letters and then the vowels. So I hope you get something out of that, and maybe, who knows, you might have great crack looking at the place names around the country and seeing if they're spelt correctly or not. Okay, Sinead, gur míle maith agah agus slán go fóill.